So Spencer, what are your thoughts on success criteria and rubrics?
I'm pretty torn, to be honest, because I think both of them can benefit students, and I know it's not realistic for every assignment, but I feel like there are some assignments where having both would benefit different learners, just because everybody can interpret them differently, and everybody, like personally in university, I would much rather get a rubric than success criteria, but I know other people that are the complete opposite, so I guess, yeah, I'm pretty torn up on both of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think,
like
yeah. You go, Brayden.
like adding like in my opinion, I would like add the checklist like we did. You just have a checklist, which is the form of a rubric, which is stated in our week 5, February 11th readings. But anyways, you have a checklist, and then that allows them to check off the boxes that they need, and then once they have that, they can look in their rubric and see where they're at, considering the checklist and that. But does anyone have any further comments?
I was gonna say, I think like it's good to vary both. So like sometimes for different assignments, if you just want to use rubric or if you just want to use the success criteria, that's good, because like you said, it is a little unrealistic to use it every single time. And like if you're making rubrics for every single assignment that you do and you're teaching multiple different classes, that's a lot. And I don't know, like as interning teachers and then as first year teachers, if that's going to be as realistic for us. So I think it's important to like choose kind of appropriately when we do, and like make sure that those assessment pieces that we aren't using like a rubric or a success criteria are still very authentic and they're meaningful for the students.
Next question is, how do you perceive of your work as an educator in relation to disrupting some of the more traditional approaches to assessment in light of the significance of the 21st century competencies, multimodalities, and inherent structural issues with some of the traditional forms of assessment?
I think a big thing is we have to, like, we've learned so much in our education classes and every that, so we have to be willing to put them into practice. And I think since they are quite new, it's gonna take some time and it'll take practice, and that's one of the biggest things. And I think especially too, like maybe for our internship, like try different things and try different modes of assessment, but also be cautious, like your co-op might not be on the same page with you as that, so taking those baby steps to get there, not just like jumping right into a whole different kind of form of assessment that maybe your co-op has never seen before, is the best option in the first month. So like starting small and then getting bigger is the way to go. Like for example, I gave this one in my individual video as well, but like I know my my aunt does this idea, so it's a combination of social studies and English outcomes, and it's called like the Wax Museum, and it's to get students to work on like oral presentation skills, but then also kind of reciting different things about a historical figure. So the one she did, it was a grade 8 social studies in English, and they had to pick like a historical or a Canadian historical figure from like this time frame, do research on them, get to know a bit about them, and then they were like wax museum figures, so they like rented out or booked out the library for like an hour, and then they would get younger kids to come and see them perform, and like since it was a wax museum, they would like present their 2-minute blurb that they learned about their people, and then so the teacher would assess them. She wouldn't assess them on the first time, they would explain. So like the one student did like Louis Brielle, I think, and then kind of explained what he did and kind of what happened to him, and then she would give them like 3 different times to say their speech, and then like on the 3rd one she'd mark them and say, you know what, they hit all this criteria, and they obviously had the rubric before, but it just was a different method of getting the students to orally present and learn about history and social studies in a different format. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there that especially as first year teachers, as interns, we aren't going to be able to rewrite everything, and we aren't going to be able to change our co-op's mind. And I don't think we want to be pushing too hard. I think definitely making some small changes and adding some social context into your assessments or into what you're assessing and all that is huge nowadays. But at the end of the day, we're just wanting our students to succeed. And yeah, I just think you just gotta learn about your kids and just really build those relationships so that the students trust you, and with that trust, they can tell you what they need, and you can kind of base your teaching and your forms of assessment around that too.
Alright, so yeah, just looking at this, I kind of think about the traditional forms of assessment and just looking at one of the Howard Gardner's articles with the multiple intelligences, and it just shows that we only hit on the logistical and linguistic intelligences, where there's multiple, and I believe there's at least 7, and they keep on coming as we keep going for more intelligences. But then just leading off that 21st century competencies, where they talk about your cognitive, interpersonal, and interpersonal, and then leading into more specifics. And then going off that, we even have the different literacies, which now coming into this age, we have a lot to do with digital literacies. So how do we touch on that as a form of assessment? And then all these other ways to allow for more equity, as if we have only linguistic and logical ways of assessment, then we're allowing all those 5 other groups of individuals who have more strengths in those categories to be left behind and go into more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Different way, right?
Building on that, I think some of the reasons why I believe that I already see a lot of that happening is because as a future physical educator and health, I believe that we're kind of a step above, where we aren't just looking at the logistical and the linguistics, because in health you're definitely with wellness there and the
Medicine wheel?
the medicine wheel, you're already hitting so many of those other aspects. So I think that in a lot of other areas, and you look at math, you look at English, and English is an easy one where you can make those next steps too. But those are the more traditional classes for sure, where we are kind of, well, some teachers aren't, but some teachers are definitely stuck in a rut.
Just
And yeah, oh, okay. I was gonna say, just with that, so like, yeah, in the phys ed, like in the phys ed class, and then in health as well, well, I think especially in phys ed, it allows us to touch on those, what is like music ability, or like
Rhythm.
learning and all that kind of, yeah, rhythm, all that, that's what I was trying to get at too, but also like movement as well. But it just kind of lets people learn in a different method than like logistic and linguistic and all that kind of stuff. So it's, and the one thing I was like wondering too, like our co-op brought up, was why, especially like in math, like if a student is very good at math and numbers is their thing, why do they kind of get an advantage? Because they will get a good mark at the end, but then students who are in phys ed, like it's not always fair. Like we're kind of looking at the fair and equitable aspect of like, for the students who aren't as physically literate, how come we aren't giving those ones who are that little bit extra mark? Like it's not, they're saying for us it's not equitable to be doing so.
yeah, because they worked on it and challenged themselves
Yeah.
in that sense, while these math people and the people with the strengths in that subject. Yeah, I get that. And going from the question that you were talking about on the physical literacy and like the kinesthetic way of learning, but you were talking about how in your pre-internship they used forms of standardized testing, like
Yeah,
and
that.
how it's writing and just circling answers. So when we have that form, why aren't we using it summatively to assess that kinesthetic learning, since it's physical education and going into this linguistic, which is in every other class?
Yeah.
That's a very great point. And I think at the end of the day, it's just easier. And because there's not, you can definitely use observation, but you can't be grabbing all your marks from that. And then I think it's just a lot of work, and there's some teachers that don't want to do that work to get the the marks from the physical literacy aspect of phys ed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, so now we're just gonna lead into some of the individual videos and the questions that we have regarding the conversations.
Okay.
So,
Do we want to start off with, since we've kind of been getting on this, we are all physical education majors, so why don't we ask the question, should fitness testing be a form of formative assessment or summative assessment? I think it's a big one, and I know at our school they were debating it a lot, like that was a big debate on PD Day, so I think it's something we definitely need to consider, and what school policies definitely think of it too.
Okay, well, personally, I believe that it should be both. And definitely, it's like the same thing as math. The first day of fitness testing, it's not going to be like the same thing in math. First day of a unit, you're not giving them a test, right? So, but you're still going to be formatively assessing them. So I think on the first day of fitness testing, even the next couple of days of fitness testing, you're going to be formatively assessing them. And at the end, I do believe that you can summatively assess them, and I'm not necessarily saying that it should be all on their physical literacy, but because if they have a good knowledge, background, and understanding of it, and they can write about their fitness journey too, well, that's great too, and that can be summative. But at the end of the day, I do believe there still should be some marks for physical literacy and your fitness testing.
Yeah, I would have to say I completely agree with you, Spencer, because I think, like what they were saying, a lot of students don't, well, like in our class, a lot of students, the only time they were active in a day was that hour of phys ed that they had. So I think for them to be aware of all these different things, and then to kind of, like, I think fitness testing is definitely beneficial for making physical goals, and also SMART goals, and it can also be like other holistic aspect of goals in there incorporated as well. But I think it's also kind of a baseline, so in that formative you can see where you're at. So as long as you're using appropriate fitness testing modalities, it is very beneficial, and like students can see, okay, like this is where I started, let's kind of see how we progress over the year or over the semester, whatever it is, and what things are you doing throughout there, like what opportunities are we as the teacher providing the students to help them get better and basically improve. Because I think fitness is a big thing, like anybody who does it, no matter where you start, if you work at it, you will improve. Doesn't matter who you are, like I believe that, and I think that's really important, and it can help build people's self-esteem and self-confidence when they recognize that, because even if it's a small improvement, it's still a big improvement, and that can also spark more intrinsic motivation as well.
yeah, and it's kind of interesting because, like, we just talked to Kathy Fowler, and she said that there's no outcome or indicator stating that we have to fitness test, but it is that benchmark and can help people build on those goals that they have.
Yeah.
And another thing I think about it is, if I'm gonna assess in my class, I think of going through the percentiles, which we talked about,
Yeah.
and allowing them to do that, and that would be their mark right off the start, but this mark would change after the whole year, so we'd still base on percentiles, and then afterwards, if they never got the mark that they wanted, we would also base it on that improvement aspect.
Mhm.
So if they had 5 push-ups and they improved to 10 push-ups, that would show like a general mark, and like you'd have something based around that on the on the improvement side. And then if they already have that baseline fitness of like the largest percentile, they're above the average, then that allows them to have a good mark, because it shows that they don't need the improvement as much, but they're still staying consistent and trying to make them better,
Yeah.
which is kind of like a two-way form
Yeah.
to do it.
And I think that's a really cool thing to bring up too, is like kind of staying consistent. Like I think a lot, like in school systems, like they have the assumptions that students should be learning new things every day. Honestly, for me, I don't think that's realistic. Like I can't remember what article it stated in, but I remember reading that and I was like, I don't think that's generally possible. So I think it's okay for students to still like learn, but be consistent in their learnings and find that it's okay that you're not learning a bunch of new things every day. Like, you want to build those meaningful learnings that you're going to take with you and use throughout the rest of your life. So if that, honestly, that assumption to me just didn't really make sense. So I think, like, what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is like our position as pre-service or as future service teachers is to kind of get that notion out of the way and work towards that, or towards reducing that.
Yeah, and in your video, like, just going off another question, like, of the self-assessment, like, do we think that we should be giving them a mark based on like pure and self-assessment and using that as a summative piece,
Yes,
or
I forgot about
are we using that as a formative piece leading into helping us grade our mark, or is that just not allowed?
What do you think, Spencer?
Well, we kind of touched on this earlier too, and I'm all for peer and self-assessment, but I'm more so personally for it as a formative way of assessment. I feel at an older grade, and in like once there is that social responsibility, that maybe you could add a percentage into their grade, their summative grade, but I still feel like there's different levels of feedback that you're going to get from different people, and I don't think it should affect the person who's getting the feedback's grade. So at the end of the day, I think it's a great formative assessment, but I wouldn't use it too much in my classroom for summative.
Nice. Yeah, so I think it should be like, peer assessment it kind of adds to that summative, but it's not a part of the mark. So like when we did it in our pre-internship, and it was on a dance, so it's like you mark other people like on how they did, and then you take that peer assessment form, so then it's like, you know, if one group, they didn't hit all the outcome criteria, and then you give them their mark, but then also the peers who were evaluating gave them a mark as well, and it was similar to yours. You can show the person, you know, me, like, and your peers, like, believe that this is where you're at, or if you don't even have to show them the peer stuff, you can just say, this is your feedback. But if the students who did the dance say, well, we want more, like, how didn't we do it, you know, different things, then you can show them this is what your peers thought as well. So if it's like not necessarily like the same, like that doesn't go into the summative assessment mark, but it just adds to like the meaning behind it and the feedback that you're going to give the students, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's tough because yeah, it's always gonna, like what we're all saying is that it should only be used kind of as a formative, but help us in our grading process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, do you believe that too?
Yes, for sure.
Alright, so that's what we believe, but yeah, like talking about it, in this class we have peer assessments and that
Yeah.
they're graded for marks. So like, should there be sometimes in like, yeah, those higher grades, grade 11, 12, where we believe that the students have that social responsibility in order to do it and have a mark attached, or is it just always that it should always be based on our, like, because we're the professionals and we should always be doing that, but in the curriculum it also has a social responsibilities outcome, so it's kind of a two-headed
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I think too, it depends on the students that you may have in your classroom, because I know every time you may luck out every once in a while and you get a good group of students, so they can tackle that little bit extra responsibility. But also if you have a group that maybe hasn't learned those social responsibility outcomes or those, I guess, just learnings yet, then maybe that's not for them, and then maybe you kind of have to maybe eventually build into it. But if they're not there, then you gotta, like Spencer said earlier, build those relationships, get to know your students so you can provide for them in the best way with assessments and your learnings as best as possible.
And it's hard because you're also factoring in like their bias and all the things that go with the assessment values, and now we're bringing it on to the students.
Exactly.
So that's like a difficult area because then you're factoring in like 20 students' bias and reliability
Yeah.
and all these different areas.
That's a
So
lot.
it'd be kind of difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if it's an outcome, we should just maybe just base the social responsibility on different aspects or the way they approach situations.
So, Brayden, how will you make your assessment modes more authentic for your students?
Well, like for me, I really want to build off the using very different ways of learning, like using those different multiple intelligence and forms of modes in order to incorporate that, and using those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy and creating and just building off that and making students think about their thoughts and answering questions and building off that, and just even looking at how you're aligning with your outcomes. So just in the thoughts of, we should be assessing the students on the outcomes, but in a way people believe that we need to assess students on just that linguistic form. So when I'm thinking about it and I want my students to actually gain that outcome, I want them to be using their strengths. So whether it's visual, kinesthetic, spatial, or linguistic, or any other form, I want them to be assessed on that, because it's more so on your achievement of the outcome. It doesn't say how you actually have to achieve it. So they can give it to me in any form, and I'll just make my rubrics and success criteria align to be a general format to allow for that. And that's
Awesome. I like it. That's really good. I think to end here, just give like a final statement on how will you know when your students know in terms of your summative assessments?
Well, personally, I think it's going to be utilizing that formative assessment and seeing the students' growth on the subject matter. And then you should be confident before you give that summative assessment at the end that your students have it down. And yeah, just utilizing the different modes of formative assessment, seeing the students' knowledge, that's all I'm going to know.
Awesome, I like it.
Yeah, well, I believe it was in an article by Volante that stated that students will really know once you actually have assessments in place. So once you've given them an assessment, even though it's formative or summative, they can actually tell you how it's going to be and like where they're at. And we can even use those reflective journals to allow them to see.
Yeah.
And then we'll judge based off of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like what both of you guys have said. I think in terms of like how will I know when they know, so it's like obviously those assessments, that's the biggest part, like the formative and summative. It allows you to see what your students can, or how your students can demonstrate they know the desired outcome. And like what you said too, have confidence in your students' prior understandings and the understandings that they develop during the learning journey, and then once they get to the summative, that they will be successful. And I think one thing is important too, like after the summative assessment, you don't just like leave the outcome and like you're done that outcome, you're done that unit, it's all done. I think it's kind of a continuous process, so you're continually bringing it back. Like I know in phys ed we all use like consistent performance cues, like common terminology and all that kind of stuff. So by doing that, it kind of reiterates those outcomes that we have already taught and the students have learned and understood. So by doing that, it just like makes that continuous learning journey and really ties everything together.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.
Coffee time.